Welcome to the Haven Collective. I'm JR, and this is this week's Beacon Bit. A few weeks ago in one of our discussions, I shared one of the only experiences that I've had as a person who has been excluded from a place of power, and that's when I called AT&T for customer support. Now, this was a lot of years ago, and I'm pretty sure I was calling for internet technical support. And you know how it is, when you call a customer support system, you get the voice phone tree where it says, I can help you, tell me what you need. And so I said, I need technical support, it's for my internet. And after, 10 minutes or so of navigating voice prompts, I managed to get to a real live person. And I don't remember any of the people's names, and obviously probably should protect their privacy in case they're watching this. Let's just call this guy Bob, right? He said, hi, I'm Bob. And I said, hi, Bob, I'm calling to try to get my internet technical support. And he goes, oh, I'm sorry, this is technical support for wireless phones. And I said, okay, well, I don't know how I got here. I tried to follow the voice prompts. Can you transfer me to the right person? And he said, sure, no problem. I'll transfer you to internet technical support. So, I wait on hold for a little bit, and then another person, let's call her Sharon, answers the phone, and she says, hi, this is Sharon, thanks for calling AT&T. And I explained all of my woes to Sharon, and she says, oh, you want technical support for internet, but this is sales for internet. You reached the wrong place. And I said, well, sorry, that must have been Bob's fault. Can you transfer me to the right people? And she said, yes, of course I can, and transferred me yet again. And I reached another person, let's call her Janet, and Janet answers the phone, and she says, hi, and I said, hello, Janet, I'm sure hope you can help me. Here's all of my technical woes. And she said, oh, you're in the wrong place. I think at that point I had ended up in, like satellite launch support or something way off base, right? And I got so frustrated, and I said, I know this is not your fault, but I've been on the phone for like 40 minutes at this point. You're the third different rep that I've talked to, and every time someone transfers me, they transfer me to the wrong place. And she said, I understand your frustrations. I tell you what, I can't help you, but I'm gonna stay on the phone with you until we get you to the right place. I thought, wow, Janet, thank you so much. That actually means a lot that you would do that. And she said, yeah, no problem. And I kid you not, it took Janet 3 more tries to get us transferred to the right people. She would stay on the phone with me, we'd get transferred to someone else, they would say, hi, thanks for calling AT&T. She would say, is this internet technical support? And they would say, no, this is TV sales. And then we'd try again, and then we'd try again. And after the 3rd time, while we were on hold, waiting to see if we had by chance landed in the right department, she said, is this what it's been like for you when you called? And I said, yeah. This is what it was like. It took me 3 tries before I even got to you, Janet. And she said, this is so frustrating. I didn't know it was like this. Now, that didn't fix AT&T's labyrinthine customer support network, and I did ultimately finally get, with Janet's help, to the right place. But I've never forgotten how much it meant to me that someone who was inside of the power structure, someone who had no idea what it was like to be a customer calling and trying to get help, how much it meant when they said, I didn't know it was like this. I'm so sorry. I'm going to stay with you in this until we get it fixed. I mean, genuinely, I'm still talking about it more than a decade later. That's how much it meant. And I share that story because today we're talking about what it's like to have a hard conversation. And I mean, there are lots of hard conversations in the world, but surely calling customer support is one of those hard conversations, right? But hard conversations, what we here at the Haven Collective called sacred conversations, take place in the midst of the real world. They don't happen in a vacuum. A hard conversation, a sacred conversation, never takes place between 2 people who have a different set of who have the same set of power dynamics. We all have different social locations. We all have different privilege levels, different experiences, and that can make coming into a sacred conversation really fraught. And because I'm a cis, hetero, well-educated, able-bodied white guy, I am almost always a person who's in the position of Janet. I'm on the inside of the systems. I'm the person that the systems most often was built to service. And so it's actually really hard for me to know what it's like to be a person who's excluded from the system, who's on the outside of it. So when I come into a sacred conversation, it's really important for me, if we're going to be discussing particularly something that's fraught or something that's tense, for me not to insist on understanding things the way I see them. Because a sacred conversation, and we know this here at Haven, is not about convincing someone. It's about conversation. It's about learning. My goal should not be to convince you of how I see things. My goal should be to understand how you see things. And to do that, part of what I have to do is understand your power dynamics. So this week we had a pretty long reading. It was all of John 3 and 4, but it was two different interactions Jesus had. One with a man named Nicodemus and one with an unnamed Samaritan woman. And the two conversations go pretty differently. The conversation that Jesus has with Nicodemus feels almost combative, whereas the conversation that he has with the Samaritan woman feels a little more playful, a little more coy. And I really think that's because of the difference in power dynamics with where people enter the relationship. In John chapter 3, when Jesus talks to Nicodemus, Nicodemus comes in as a wealthy, educated, urban, Jewish man. He's one of the most respected people in his culture. And so he comes in with a lot of arrogance, and Jesus immediately begins to dismantle that in him, confusing and confounding him, and trying to help Nicodemus understand that he's not nearly as close to God as he thinks he is. That's a recognition that Nicodemus has to have in order for him to grow. On the other hand, the Samaritan woman is poor. She's probably uneducated. She's Samaritan, which means she and Jesus are racially separated. She's also socially outcast because she's had 5 different husbands and is currently living with a man that she is not married to. And so what Jesus does with her is something that's a lot more kind, a lot more playful, and a lot more inviting, because what he wants to communicate to her is that she's actually a lot closer to God than she thinks that she is. And that's a recognition that she needs to have in order for her to grow spiritually. And that's why Jesus' interaction with Nicodemus ends with a lot of confusion, because Nicodemus leaves unsure of himself. He has a lot of stuff that he needs to figure out. And again, spoilers for the end of John's gospel, Nicodemus ends up figuring out who Jesus is and is one of the few people that stands with Jesus at his burial. But it takes him a while to get there because he has to figure out stuff. On the other hand, the Samaritan woman is the first person in the Gospel of John that Jesus admits that he's the Messiah to, which is a huge deal, and it's honestly a little bit crazy that the first person that he reveals that to is this woman who is so far down the perceived social ladder. But again, we can see how in these relationships, in these conversations that Jesus enters with these people, he treats them differently, he treats the conversations differently, and a lot of that has to do with the social locations of the people that he's talking to and the power dynamics. It's really important when we begin to enter into a hard conversation, to a sacred conversation, that we at least have some understanding of what the power dynamics are. What are the racial dynamics? What are the gender dynamics? What are the social dynamics? What are the economic dynamics? All of these things matter. And if you are saying, well, gosh, I've never really thought about those things in a hard conversation before, that probably means you're a lot like me and that we're pretty high up on the social hierarchy. Because people who are outside of the system, like I was when I had to call AT&T, are pretty aware of how the system is designed to frustrate and exclude. So it's entirely possible that even when we have this understanding of social dynamics and we have a hard or a sacred conversation, that it still is not going to go well. Because hard conversations are hard. They don't always end the way Jesus' conversation with the Samaritan woman did. Sometimes they end more like the Nicodemus conversation, where people leave sort of confused and frustrated. But I think no matter what, when we are careful to enter into these sacred conversations well, we can always celebrate them. And I think there's 3 different things that we can do when a hard conversation doesn't end the way we hoped it would. The first thing we can do is when we feel them getting hairy and getting frustrating, we can step back and we can kind of reevaluate. We can say, whoa, 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 it feels like we're going off the rails. Where did we get off track? Then, and again, we talk about this at Haven, we can return to that gem statement. Is there something that we all agreed about that when we started this conversation, we were trying to find some common ground on? Can we sort of take a deep breath and recenter on that gem statement? And then again, even when we do that, it's not always going to end the way that we thought it would. But I think it's still worth, at the end of a hard conversation, celebrating that there's been some real growth. If we can have a truly effective hard conversation where I can genuinely understand another person's point of view, even if we don't end up agreeing, even if we don't end up seeing eye to eye, that relationship has deepened and grown. And we have been able to come together in a real way, even without agreement, because we have practiced being together in that discomfort and in that disagreement. And that honestly, even though it may not feel like it, is still worth celebrating. And I think Nicodemus' story shows us that it's not incumbent on a single conversation to bear all of that weight. Now, in our beacons this week, we're going to be talking about hard conversations. We're going to be talking about our own social locations. We're going to be talking about how we map all of that stuff out. And this may end up being a kind of a fraught and scary conversation. Again, especially if you're like me and you're not used to thinking about these things. It can feel really threatening. So I just want you to take a deep breath and remember that we're all here because God brings us together to have these beautiful, life-changing, world-changing conversations. And that the goal, as always, is not consensus, but it's conversation. And I hope you leave the beacons this week feeling as though you've been truly seen and more understood. I look forward to the conversations. Go in grace and peace this week.